The night was burning, and the sky was a jagged wound across the horizon. As Captain Mara Leland pressed her boots into the mud that no longer felt like earth, but some strange, shifting skin that trembled under her every step, she could not hear. Her own breath over the pounding of distant artillery, the air itself shaking like a broken drum. She was supposed to wait. She was supposed to follow orders. Stay behind the safety line and monitor the collapse from command. But the idea of sitting behind screens while the men screamed across the ridge made her bones hum with rebellion. She could not stand still. The comms crackled with shattered voices, each one a piece of someone she had trained with, someone she had promised to bring home. And through the chaos there was something else, a faint rhythm buried under the static like a heartbeat beneath concrete. It pulsed in 3 short bursts, then a long pause, and then another 3. The pattern made no sense to anyone else but to her. It felt like a whisper from another lifetime. She moved toward the edge of the perimeter, ignoring the shouts that chased her name through the black wind. Lieutenant Pike yelled after her to stop, but his voice faded behind the roaring engines as the extraction craft took off, leaving behind smoke and dust and the smell of burning oil. Mara adjusted her headset and spoke to no one in particular. She just needed to hear her own voice. She said, "We are going in." And even though no one answered, she imagined that the silence meant yes. She imagined that those who still believed in her would follow without question. She climbed onto the transport carrier, the old metal beast that should have been retired years ago, and hit the ignition. The engines coughed alive with a roar that cut through the night. The road to the ridge was a corridor of shadows, the headlights slicing through broken trees and twisted metal that used to be tanks. She remembered every route, every trench, every hiding spot from the early days of the conflict, before the communications blackout, before the silence swallowed half the battalion. The higher command had called the area dead ground, unfit for rescue, but Mara had memorized the maps before they were burned. She knew the terrain, like she knew her own heartbeat. The problem was that the signal kept changing direction, like someone or something was trying to lead her deeper into the chaos. The faint pattern returned again in her ear. The 3 short bursts, the long pause, the same rhythm she had heard when she was a child sitting on her father's lap as he tapped secret messages into her palm while teaching her Morse code. He used to say, "If you ever hear this again, it means I am with you. It means keep going." She had laughed back then, never thinking that one day those taps would guide her through a battlefield. Now she could almost feel his hand again, the same warmth, the same steady patience that had always anchored her when everything else broke. The carrier jolted hard as a shockwave rolled through the ground. A shell had landed somewhere nearby. The noise erupted like the sky itself was tearing apart. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward. The radio flared again, but this time the voices were clearer. Fragments of screams broken by bursts of static. Someone yelling coordinates, someone else crying for extraction. She caught a single phrase, "Hold the line," and then nothing. The silence pressed against her like a weight she drove. Faster, the mud splattering across her visor, until all she could see was streaks of brown and red. She did not stop to wipe them away. She just listened to the pattern repeating itself, the secret message calling her through the darkness. At the crest of the ridge, she stopped the vehicle and stepped into the wind. It howled around her like a living thing carrying ash and rain together. The ground was littered with helmets, torn uniforms, and shattered comms units. Every step she took felt heavier. As if the earth itself wanted to pull her down, she activated her scanner, the weak blue light flickering as it searched for life signs. The display showed faint blips, dozens of them scattered like stars in the static. Each one a possible survivor. She whispered to herself, "We are not too late," and moved forward through the smoke. She found the first group huddled inside a collapsed bunker, their eyes hollow, their hands trembling. They looked at her like she was a ghost. One of them recognized her voice and started to cry, saying they had been told no one was coming. That command had sealed the ridge off, that they had heard the final order to abandon them. She knelt beside him and said that orders could be wrong and that she was here. Now the soldier stared at her like he wanted to believe, but did not know how she told them to gather weapons and prepare to move, because they were not dying here, not tonight. The wind carried another echo, the pattern again, the secret rhythm. She could almost see it now, flashing across her visor, as if the static itself was alive, guiding her deeper. She wondered if she was chasing ghosts, if maybe the signal was just feedback from broken transmitters, but her heart said otherwise. It was too precise, too familiar. She thought of her father again, of the stories he used to tell about loyalty and sacrifice, about never leaving anyone behind. He had disappeared years ago, lost in another conflict far from this one. And the military had declared him dead, but she had never believed it. She had always felt that somewhere out there his spirit still walked with those who refused to surrender. The rescued Marines followed her, now their faces smeared with dirt and disbelief as they crossed the burning fields. The heat was unbearable. The sky a constant flicker of red and orange from the artillery fire. Above, one soldier stumbled and fell, and she lifted him by the arm, her strength surprising even herself. The signal grew louder with every step until it was no longer faint. It was pulsing steady and strong from the northern ridge. She ordered the group to take cover and crawled ahead alone through the mud and debris until she reached the source. It was a comms tower half destroyed, leaning at an angle like a dying animal, wires hanging loose and sparking against the ground. She climbed it carefully, feeling the metal groan under her weight. The signal was coming from the control panel, still alive. Somehow, she ripped open the casing and stared at the blinking light. It was transmitting in Morse again, but not random, not distress. It was deliberate. It was a code only she could know. It spelled her name 3 times, and then one word, continue. She froze, her heart hammering. She looked at the burned tag attached to the console and saw the initials, JL, her father's initials. The moment hit her like a strike of lightning. She could not breathe. She reached out and touched the tag. Her gloves scraping the metal, she whispered that she understood. She whispered that she would not stop, that she would finish what he started and bring them all home. She turned back toward the waiting soldiers, her body trembling but her purpose clear. The ridge behind her exploded in a rain of fire as the enemy advanced, but she did not look back. She signaled the group to move, and they ran together through the ruins, their silhouettes swallowed by smoke and dust as the hidden rhythm kept beating in her ear. The rescue had only begun, but in that moment, she knew that something much larger was unfolding. Something her father had left for her, buried in the noise of war. She did not know how he had done it, or if he was even alive, but she knew the signal would lead her to the truth. Night carried on without end, the storm of fire and metal roaring overhead, and through it all she moved like a shadow, unstoppable, unyielding, every step in defiance of command, every breath fueled by the voice she could not see but could feel guiding her across the dark. The storm refused to die as Captain Mara Leland led the survivors across the shattered valley, their boots sinking into the mud that glowed faintly with embers from the burning ridge behind them. Every breath was heavy, and every heartbeat sounded like artillery. The night sky was torn by flashes of orange and white, and through it all the pattern pulsed again, faint but persistent, calling her north toward the mountains where the signal grew stronger. The Marines followed. Her in silence, their eyes flicking toward the darkness, as if expecting the earth itself to rise against them. She could feel command trying to reach her through the comms bursts of broken transmissions, demanding she return, ordering her to abort the operation. But the words dissolved into static. She knew the truth. They had written them off. They wanted her gone. They wanted to bury the failure and move on. She was the disobedient captain, the one who never learned to stop when told. But she had never cared about orders that left people behind. She was raised to listen to conscience, not command. And tonight conscience spoke through that invisible rhythm that guided her through ruin. They reached an old trench system long abandoned from. The early campaigns, its walls collapsed and crawling with roots. The rain poured harder, turning everything into rivers of black sludge. One Marine slipped and nearly vanished into the mud until she caught his arm and pulled him free. He looked at her with eyes wide and shaking, whispering that it was like the ground was alive. She told him it always had been war. Did that to the land? It made it breathe and bleed, just like them. He said nothing more, just nodded and kept moving. The signal surged. Again louder, clearer. The same sequence, 3 short bursts, 1 long one, 3 again. She could almost feel it in her bones now, like it was no longer coming through the headset, but through her very veins. She asked the corporal nearest to her if he could hear it, but he only shook his head, saying the frequency was dead. She knew then it was only for her whoever sent it had meant it to reach her alone. She remembered her father sitting in the dark, tapping codes into her palm and saying sometimes the only way to speak to the living is through the noise. The terrain narrowed as they approached the northern ridge, a canyon of rock and metal, where old machinery lay half buried like fossils of forgotten wars. The wind howled through the gaps, singing a low metallic dirge. She told the group to rest while she scouted ahead. They obeyed without question. Exhaustion had carved them hollow. She climbed the slope, her hands cold against the slick. Stone the signal growing faster, like an excited heartbeat urging her onward. She reached the top and froze. Below her stretched a valley filled with wreckage. Dozens, maybe hundreds of downed transports, tanks, and aircraft twisted together like bones. Of some fallen giant in the center stood a tall antenna black against the lightning. Every time the sky flashed, she saw it gleam like glass. She crouched and watched the pattern flicker from its base, 3 short, 1 long, 3 again. Her chest tightened. The design was familiar. Too familiar. It was the same model of field transmitter her father had once worked on during his last assignment. She slid down the slope, her boots cutting through mud and debris until she reached the edge of the wreck field. The smell of oil and smoke was suffocating. She moved between the broken machines, each one marked by bullet holes and scorch marks. Her scanner blinked weakly, detecting faint life signs scattered among the wrecks. She whispered into her mic, telling the Marines to come down fast. She could save more if they moved now, but before she finished the message, the static roared in her ear, drowning her voice. Then a new sound emerged, faint, mechanical, but rhythmic. It matched the signal, and yet it carried something else beneath it, words hidden in the pattern. She pressed the headset tighter, straining to hear, and for a moment she thought she heard her own name again. Not the code, not the rhythm, but her name spoken by a voice she had not heard in years. It was her father's voice, calm, steady, the same as she remembered. She froze, her throat tightening. The storm around her seemed to vanish, replaced by silence so heavy it hurt to breathe. The voice said one thing, "Hold the line," and then vanished. Her knees nearly gave way. She stared at the transmitter, trembling. She wanted to believe she had imagined it, but the sound had been too clear, too deliberate. She felt tears stinging her eyes, but she wiped them away with the back of her glove. There was no time for disbelief. She shouted orders for the Marines to spread out and start searching for survivors. The valley came alive with movement shapes rising from the wreckage, men and women half conscious, their faces coated in ash. The number kept growing more and more until the comms were flooded with reports of lives found. She coordinated every movement, directing evac teams and keeping the wounded moving even as the storm grew wilder. Every few minutes the ground shook under artillery fire from the distance, but she ignored it. She was focused on the rhythm. The signal was still transmitting, and she realized it was not random at all. It was transmitting coordinates deeper inside the valley beneath the debris. She marked the location on her visor and ran for it, stumbling through the mud until she reached a fallen aircraft. Its fuselage cracked open like a rib cage inside. She found a sealed black case attached to a battery unit still blinking weakly. She opened it, and inside were dozens of data chips, each labeled with unit numbers and tactical reports. She recognized one immediately. It bore her father's handwriting, rough and quick across the label. It said, Project Echo. She took it in her hand and felt the weight of it heavier than metal. She knew it was a message. He had left something he had discovered, something that someone had buried beneath layers of command silence, maybe even the reason he had disappeared. She tucked it inside her jacket and turned back. Toward her unit, the storm of fire reflecting in her visor. She knew she had found more than survivors. She had found the beginning of truth. The pattern pulsed one final time and then faded, leaving only static behind. She whispered, "Thank you, though." She was not sure if anyone or anything could still hear her. She looked around at the hundreds of soldiers emerging from the dark alive against every expectation, and she felt the ache of hope for the first time in years as the night wind blew. Through the wreckage carrying ash and whispers, she promised silently that she would finish what her father started, no matter the cost. The dawn never came. The storm had swallowed the sky, turning it into an endless gray ocean of smoke and lightning. As Captain Mara Leland led the rescued Marines through the valley of wreckage, every step they took felt heavier, as if the earth wanted to pull them back into its burning depths. She could see exhaustion etched into their faces, but also something else, a flicker of belief that maybe they could survive this, that maybe the impossible could still be done. She carried the black case close to her chest, feeling the faint hum inside it like a heartbeat trapped in metal. She knew it was important, even though she did not yet understand why her father had left it for her. They found temporary shelter beneath the remains of a fallen transport, its wings bent into an arch above them. The rain hammered the metal in steady rhythm, echoing the code that still haunted her memory. 3 short, 1 long 3. Again. She could still hear it in the quiet moments between thunder, like a pulse hidden inside the air. She opened the case again. Her fingers trembling inside were the data chips. Each one, marked with unit identifiers and field logs, she slotted one into her visor link. The screen flickered to life, showing a map overlay of the region, but the coordinates led beyond their current position into the mountains where the signal had first called her. The Marines asked what the plan was, and she told them they were moving north. Command was silent. No reinforcements, no evacuation, just static. She knew they were on their own, but the strange calm in her chest told her it was the right path. She could feel her father guiding her like a ghost in the circuitry. The rain turned to mist as they climbed the incline, leaving behind the valley of twisted metal. The silence of the high ground was unsettling, broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional groan of distant thunder. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The higher they climbed, the colder it became, the mist swallowing the world until they could barely see one another. She kept checking the scanner, but the readings were erratic, like the mountain itself was interfering with the signal. Then, without warning, the pattern returned, faint but sharp. 3 short, 1 long 3. It came through her headset so suddenly she stopped. The group held up a hand for silence and listened. There was another layer beneath it now. Not just rhythm, but faint words distorted by static. She strained to hear and caught fragments, coordinates, directives, fragments of a voice she could almost recognize. It said, Gate Alpha, Sequence 2. She whispered the phrase under her breath and realized her father must have encoded instructions into the signal itself. They followed the new coordinates to a cliffside half hidden by fog and overgrowth behind the vines. They found what looked like the entrance to an old bunker sealed by a rusted steel door. The Marines looked to her for orders. She approached the panel on the side, wiped away the dirt, and saw a keypad still faintly glowing. She entered the numbers from the signal and the door shuddered, then slowly opened. The air that spilled out was cold and metallic, carrying the scent of old electricity. She raised her weapon and stepped inside. The interior was silent except for the low hum of dormant systems. Rows of screens lined the walls, their surfaces coated in dust. She activated her visor light, revealing faded insignias on the floor. This was no ordinary bunker. It was a command facility long forgotten, probably erased from official records. The Marines spread out, checking rooms, clearing corners, while she approached the central console and inserted another data chip. The room flickered to life lights, stuttering, then holding steady, a holographic projection appeared above the console, a map of the region, with dozens of red points scattered across it, each marked with the code Echo. The projection pulsed and then shifted, showing reports from multiple units lost over the years, all linked to something called the Resonance Network. Her breath caught, she remembered. The stories her father used to tell about experimental communication systems that could transmit not just across distance, but across interference through storms and battlefields, a network designed to connect every soldier in real time. But it had been abandoned after something catastrophic. She realized now that he had been part of that project, and that he had hidden the remnants here beneath the mountain. The signal she had followed was not just a call for help. It was the last surviving heartbeat of that network, and her father had used it to reach her. One of the Marines called out from the back room. She ran to him and found another terminal still active, its screen blinking with a message waiting to be played. She touched the panel, and the image formed in the air, faint and grainy but unmistakable. It was her father, older than she remembered, but alive, his eyes steady as he spoke. He said, "If you are hearing this, then the network still breathes, and that means you found them, the ones who were left behind." He said that the project had been sabotaged by those who feared its power, that it could unite voices, even through silence, and they could not allow that. He said he had hidden the survivors within the code itself, their signals scattered across the field, waiting to be reconnected. Mara felt the tears burn again, but she stood still, listening until the recording ended with his final words.